An often overlooked but important part of St. Bernard's history is the Denis de la Ronde historic site. The ruins of the de la Ronde house and the adjoining Oak Alley is a historic site of unparalleled value and the focus of today's feature.
Shortly after the founding of the city of New Orleans, people were given grants of land fronting the Mississippi River from just downriver from the original limit, lower limit of the city of New Orleans to English Turn, which is today Poydras in St. Bernard Parish. And there was a literal who's who of colonial Louisiana living along that stretch of the Mississippi on both banks of the river. The first person to be granted what would become the Denis de la Ronde house and plantation was Adrien Dupourget. Adrien Dupourget was the colonial engineer who laid out the city of New Orleans in 1721-22, and he designed the first parish church of St. Louis, which would stand until 1788 when it was burned and replaced by today's St. Louis Cathedral. One of the most important and one of the most significant, colorful figures to establish a presence below New Orleans, just above Pointe Saint-Antoine, was Pierre Rigaud de Vaudreuil, who was governor of Louisiana in the 1740s and 50s. He purchased in 1739 a plantation that would become Araby in 20th and 19th and 21st century St. Bernard Parish. Another early owner of the de la Ronde tract was Jean Balthazar de Pontefract de Mazon. The Chevalier de Mazon succeeded in 1764 in granulating sugar at the plantation, which later would become the Denis de la Ronde property. Pierre Denis de la Ronde acquired what would become his plantation in 1799. Pierre Denis de la Ronde descended from a family which was very prominent in the European colonization of North America in what is today Quebec in Canada. Pierre Denis de la Ronde was the son of Pierre Denis de la Ronde and Madeleine Brutin. His mother, Denis de la Ronde's mother, though, was a widow before she married his father. Her first husband was Louis Xavier Martin Delino de Chalmette, and her son, who was a half-brother of Denis de la Ronde, was Ignace François Martin Delino de Chalmette, who owned the Chalmette battlefield, owned the Chalmette plantation, which became the epicenter of the American and British fighting January 8, 1815.
Denis de la Ronde fought in the American Revolution through his service in the Galvez expedition. He also participated in the settlement of the colonists from the Canary Islands who founded St. Bernard in 1780. This was the largest and most influential of the original Isleño settlements. Additionally, Denis de la Ronde served as the second commandant of St. Bernard, a member of the New Orleans Cabildo, colonel of the 3rd Regiment of the Louisiana Militia, which fought in the Battle of New Orleans, and as a delegate to Louisiana's first Constitutional Convention in 1812. Upon his death in 1824, at the age of 62, Pierre Denis de la Ronde was Major General commanding the state militia of Louisiana.
The de la Ronde house was probably built in the early 1800s, and it carries over a lot of the colonial aspects in country houses into the American time frame. But the de la Ronde house is a step above most of the country houses in Louisiana. It was by far grander than any plantation house in Louisiana that we know of. The details on the outside were very reminiscent of the old Ursuline Convent, which is the only French colonial building in the entire Mississippi Valley. The number of rooms in the house far exceeds the typical Louisiana country home, which generally only had 4 rooms on each floor and a hallway down the middle if it was Americanized with a hallway. If it was very Creole, it would lack that hallway.
The house had 16 rooms, 8 on each floor, and it was appointed with some of the finest furniture, silver, crystal, and paintings, with refinements such as hand-painted wallpaper, very similar to Magnolia Mountain Plantation in Baton Rouge. It was perhaps the most important and grandest plantation house in Louisiana in its territorial and early statehood periods.
The house is a 2-story full brick structure, which is quite different than the typical Creole style architecture, which would have used solid brick on the ground floor and brick between posts on the upper floors, say like Madame John's Legacy or the Petard House are typical examples of this. The galleries were very useful. There's very wonderful accounts of how people use the galleries, and they talk about how the breezes would go around. There'd be rolled down canvas awnings on the galleries. They would sleep on there. They would eat on there. They are an exterior room in the days before air conditioning.
The French had the tradition of establishing very formal, geometrically designed gardens around their houses, called in French parterres. And of course, at this time, the trees that bore pears, apples, these were the trees that were planted in those parterre areas.
The original parterre gardens eventually get replaced with a wonderful alley of oaks by one of the subsequent owners to the house.
The feature of the oak alley did not exist at the time of the battle, and that it was planted decades after, and that as a result, General Pakenham never saw the oaks, which many people today like to call the Pakenham Oaks.
The alley of oaks in front of the house was not there when the Delarondes owned it. It was when the widow had sold it to Daniel Wohlberg. He planted the alley of oaks, and property was subdivided to become a faubourg or a subdivision there, and it took on the name Versailles.
After the subdivision of the plantation in the 1830s, the house functioned as a school, but gradually descended into decay. It burned down in the 1880s, but even today, with its romantic ruins and stately oak alley, the Delaronde Historic Site represents the opulence of a fascinating historic period, which saw the transition of Louisiana from a European colony to a fully fledged state in the United States of America. Today, whenever thought is given to the Battle of New Orleans, many are unaware that the final military engagement of January 8, 1815 was the culmination of a larger campaign waged by the British to capture New Orleans, to control navigation along the Mississippi River and the Mississippi Valley.
So the British make this invasion into the Gulf area. The British come up Bayou Bienvenue and they hit the Villeray plantation on December 23rd, and they seized the plantation and they captured Gabriel Villeray. He escapes, goes upriver on the west bank, crosses a ferry to find Jackson on Royal Street where his headquarters was, and informs him that the British are in Chalmette. And the key is that Jackson's immediate response is an attack. And that's the night attack on the 23rd. The British are totally unsuspecting of this. And he organized where he has Marines and soldiers on the levee, and he organizes Coffee's troops along with Dennis Delaronde, to attack along the wooded edge of the cypress swamp there behind the Delaronde's plantation. The man knows his own plantation. So that's where you have the big battle of the 23rd, and the Delaronde plantation is a part of that.
Downriver, the battle was raging between the Delaronde and the Lacoste plantations down to the Villeray plantation. The Delaronde house had been set up as a field office and a temporary hospital, and so many of the bloody and wounded were brought there. The fog had made the battle very confusing, and the Americans were using what we would now call guerrilla warfare techniques, which caused even more British casualties. So it was a bloody and a very, very difficult scene. The Delaronde plantation was where they brought many of the dead and the casualties. General Pakenham himself was brought there, his body to be prepared to be sent back to Ireland for burial, but so many died in this area, these fields around the Delaronde plantation, that it's today even remembered as a sacred place for all those who lost their lives and who spilled their blood for their country and for their best interest of their commander.
I first learned about the site when we were commemorating the 200th anniversary of the Battle of New Orleans, and when I found that this was a British connected site, I thought this is certainly something that the Daughters of the British Empire would support. In 2016, we formed the Denis Delaronde Preservation Corporation with the goal of stabilizing the site and preserving it for future generations.
Jane Caruso contacted us a couple years ago, back in 2016, and she had this kind of interesting proposition for me. She said, I have these piles of bricks, pillars in the middle of a major thoroughfare, and they're falling apart, and we need someone to fix them up. So because the site's so old, when they built it, they only would have used a lime-based mortar. They probably would have slaked their own lime on site or nearby. The bricks look like they were hand-fired, some of them, or at least locally fired. They were not fired at a very high temperature, which is why the site's in such bad condition. The bricks are literally crumbling. But knowing that, we only use lime mortar in our repointing work. It's all lime, so it's all 100% matching the original historic material, or matching as closely as possible. So you can see here someone had come out before and done a repointing repair. Unfortunately, they used a Portland cement mortar, which is much too hard for this old red soft brick. So what's happened is the brick has actually worn away, which you don't want to see. Something that you'd rather see in a structure of this age, you'd rather see the mortar wear away and the bricks stay. We have the reverse happening here. That's bad. So that just means that they used a mortar that was much too hard. What we are doing is repointing with a really soft lime-based mortar, which is what they would have used originally when they built these pillars. And this soft mortar is going to let this structure age. It's not going to hurt the bricks. It's going to do exactly what it's supposed to. So that's the better material to be using on something this old.
I'm very proud to say that at this point, the stabilization is almost complete, and we can move forward with using some of the additional bricks on the site to improve some of the structures, keeping in mind what they looked like originally.
Its Battle of New Orleans-related history places the Delaronde ruins and its Oak Alley in the realm of national and international significance. The site memorializes a titanic clash between the greatest Western European empire of the time, Great Britain, and the fledgling United States of America.
The sum total of what happened at the Denis Delaronde plantation and the 1814-15 campaign to gain control of New Orleans ended with the Battle of New Orleans and launched our nation's destiny. The Denis Delaronde historic site is unsurpassed in its importance to the history of St. Bernard Parish.